From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine Podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Monday, March 13, 2023, as we continue our 2023 position season preview episodes while you listen to this podcast and attempt to fill out a March Madness bracket. Last week, we previewed the Chicago White Sox corner infielders, spending a lot of time talking about Andrew Vaughn and Yoan Moncada. In this episode, we're going to look at the White Sox middle infielders. Is 2023 a bounce-back season for Tim Anderson? Can Elvis Andrus play up to the level he did with the White Sox last year? And in emergency, who are the best available depth options for the White Sox? We'll start previewing those positions in a moment, but I want to talk about the World Baseball Classic as it's taken the baseball world by storm. And joining me is the managing editor of SoxMachine.com. It's Jim Margulis. And hello, Jim. I'm completely sold. In previous editions of the World Baseball Classic, I was kind of in. I thought it was a bit gimmicky. But after this World Baseball Classic, after Pool A and what we've seen from Pool B, and the first games in Pool C and Pool D, I watched baseball all day on Saturday, and I'm completely hooked. We've got great games, impressive performances, outstanding stadium atmospheres. I think this tournament's got staying power. How are you enjoying the World Baseball Classic, or are you indifferent, or do you not like the World Baseball Classic?
I am not as in on it, but only because the Brier, the Men's Canadian Curling Championships, happening at the same time. It's wrapping up tonight. So after that, I'm free. But I've been watching both, kind of split screening both. So I have not immersed myself in it to the level that you have but what I've seen, I've liked. And I mean, I've caught up on all highlights like the Venezuela Dominican Republic game with the shirt button malfunction and the crowd going nuts. That was awesome. Great Britain's managed to come out with a couple of quick hits that have put a little bit of a scare into the United States and then Canada, and then things got messy. But I thought it was really cool the way Czech Republic and Japan kind of clashed, and the way Japan, the words they had for each other in terms of the respect on the field of Japan trying to encourage the way the Czechs players have grown. So there's a lot of I think we're finally starting to see some of the things that were promised from the project, which was the Americans buying in, because I think that's ultimately going to sell Americans on the viability and the importance of the World Baseball Classic, when theoretically the world's most important baseball is being played in America every day. So you have that. So, I mean, having Mike Trout in and everybody else lining up behind him, that's great. And then also just the also rans, or I guess the second division of world talent, maintaining its interest and being able to field rosters that can play a game, or at least a half a game, provide some real baseball experience that I think is making this more tenable. So yeah, I think we've seen the growth of the whole World Baseball Classic. It required, I think, multiple passes at it to get it right. And now I think with America coming in full bore, and just every other part of the world shaping up, and Japan, countries like Japan and Cuba have been there already. They've been wanting to prove themselves the whole time. Same thing with Korea, but other I would say the European countries, besides the Netherlands, seeing them starting to shore up their games a lot, I think means an awful lot as well to make it more of a worldwide thing.
Yeah, Cuba with Luis Robert and Yoan Moncada, they are advancing. Italy is also advancing. And Mike Piazza is the manager for Team Italy. Don't try to have me explain how that tiebreaker worked, as everybody in Pool A finished with identical 2-2 records. I'm so glad so many people online were able to figure out the math as far as the tiebreakers. I could not get it straight. If the Netherlands scored 5 runs in the 9th inning, and they still would have lost the game, but they would have advanced over Italy. It was very confusing on the tiebreakers. But when you've got 5 teams and everybody finishes 2-2, you really need to go all the way through the tiebreakers. But alas, Cuba advances, Italy advances. our friends down in Australia, AJ Mithen, the Aussies, an upset win over Korea, and that's what really got me going because that game was absolutely crazy. In Tokyo, you mentioned Japan, and they look like every bit of the powerhouse I thought that they could be when we made our predictions in our previous podcast episode. And what can you say about the Dominican Republic and Venezuela game in Miami? You know, people, and I'm one of them, have thought long and hard about Miami being a viable major league market. Man, when you got the Dominican Republic and you got Venezuela in that stadium feels completely different than any Miami Marlins game. It even had the All-Star game there not that long ago. It was a different energy and vibe that I did not think Miami had when it came to baseball, but it feels like it only comes out during the World Baseball Classic. And this upcoming Wednesday, you got a mega matchup again, the Dominican Republic against Puerto Rico, which is going to be absolutely outstanding. And I don't know what their plans are in the future. I don't know if they've announced that they're going to try to do this every 3 years or every 4 years. I know you have the Summer Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028, in which baseball will return. The Summer Olympics goes back to Paris, and Paris, France, has no interest in building baseball fields. So baseball will not be an Olympic sport in 2024, but it will be in 2028. I'm just kind of curious on how it moves forward, but you know, we're not even to the quarterfinals yet, and I'm totally sold. Like, I really do hope they keep this format, and I think that after this particular instance, Jim, that there's gonna be significant interest, especially from the United States, because you made a great point. America needs to buy into this because so many guys would just skip because they got a regular season to think about in just a few weeks, as we're not that far away from opening day, but yet Mookie Betts leading off, Mike Trout batting second, Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado, the cornerstones of the St. Louis Cardinals. Like, that's your top four. Maybe not the greatest pitching depth, but you have some of the best position players America has to offer, and they are participating. And I hope this continues, because the next time that there's a World Baseball Classic, we'll do more on Sox Machine. I didn't have much planned for the World Baseball Classic because I was just like in fear if it would be a dud and be like, why am I spending all this energy? But the next World Baseball Classic, Jim, I promise everyone, we'll be more involved. We'll have more things for the World Baseball Classic. I didn't know what to expect because we haven't had this since 2017.
Yeah, it's a case where for some of these players, it's going to be the most important baseball they play all year, and probably for most players, especially like the ones in the countries who aren't producing a lot of major leaguers, like it will be. And that was probably a backhanded compliment well before, you know, like even 2017, I think 2017 things started to turn in the favor of, like, you know, it being important. But before then, it was just kind of like, oh, it's cute. You have this little tournament, and, you know, some countries took it seriously, some didn't. You saw the imbalance there. 2017, I think you saw, you know, America start to take it a little bit more seriously. But then, you know, with Mike Trout getting involved and everybody falling in line behind him, like, yeah, it's a case where, like, you know, it's, I guess, a bad thing for Mike Trout if it's the most important baseball he plays all year. And I think a lot of baseball fans are hoping it isn't. Like, he and Shohei Ohtani can actually do something in the postseason. But, you know, for, you know, what it is for coming before the season, for bringing in so many players who are not major leaguers, like, you know, it's the real, I think the only thing keeping it from feeling like real high stakes baseball is the pitch counts, like having that float up. And, you know, it has to happen in order to maintain major league interest. But that's really the only thing that, you know, lessens the stage of it, is just knowing there's an not arbitrary, but like a fixed, amount of pitches a guy can throw no matter how he's doing, to where he'll be removed. And it feels arbitrary if a guy's pitching well, especially like in countries where they might only have one or two good pitchers, and it could get messy afterwards.
Yeah, that's what we have been seeing. If you're one of the betting folks, live betting has been your friend during this World Baseball Classic, especially when you get into the deep parts of some countries' bullpen. They just don't have enough arms. One of the countries that has certainly impressive arms, it's got two White Sox players, Cuba. As we mentioned, they advance out of the pool, and their reward is facing the runner-up, I should say, and I believe that's going to be Australia in the quarterfinals, and they're going to have to make their way through Japan if they're going to reach the semifinals. And for Cuba, like, Yohan Moncada and Luis Robert had slow starts when you watch those games. Moncada started 1 for 11 in the World Baseball Classic. And then in the game against Panama, Cuba erupted. They were down 4-2 and they ended up winning 12-4. They scored 10 runs in a matter of 3 innings. And Yoan Moncada was a big part of that. And he has now reached on base 6 of his last 7 plate appearances, including a home run against Taiwan or Chinese Taipei. And Moncada finished as far as pool play going 6 for 17 with 2 doubles, a home run, 5 RBIs, walked twice, and struck out 3 times. That's pretty good for 4 games. So that looks a lot better than the first 2 games he played. And Luis Robert's hitting the ball hard. He doesn't have a home run to show for it, but right now he's 5 for 19. The strikeout to walk is a little concerning. He's got 7 strikeouts to 0 walks as he's just been in swing mode so far. But for a moment there, Jim, I didn't think Yoan Moncada and Luis Robert were going to be making it to the next round as they were really struggling and Cuba fell 0-2 in pool play. And then now they have won back-to-back games in large part because Moncada and Robert have been hitting. Is this a good thing for the White Sox? From a White Sox perspective, is this a good thing to see Yoan Moncada, now Luis Robert, going into the next round and continuing to play in the World Baseball Classic rather than returning back to Glendale for spring training?
I think there's like a natural element of nerves to where just like they're across on the other side of the world and, our training staff can't, maintain contact with them. And with all the ways Moncada comes up wincing, you never quite know what it is, hamstring, oblique, did he sit on his keys? It's hard to know exactly the seriousness of just, how he's feeling because he either hides pain well or hides pain poorly. It's hard to tell. But with Robert, it's more of Robert, the health issue isn't necessarily there for me as much because his injuries seem to be more almost like, there's like a trauma involved, like a serious event that happens that knocks him out. It's not the case of like where Moncada, it's like something he can play through. Robert, like you tend to know it's really hampering him. Even like when he played through the wrist issue, you could see like he could not swing the bat. He shouldn't have been out there. Why did the White Sox let him out there? I'm still confused about that. And it's never really been answered, but we have to trust that both Pedro Grifol and Jeff Head and the training staff will have some new ideas with how to stop that. But if you can set those things aside, like it seems like the stakes help them, like the pitching, while not major league caliber, a lot of spring training pitching is not major league caliber. So the game states are real. They're important. They're important, certainly, to their countrymen who are not playing in the major leagues yet, or at least a lot of them aren't. So yeah, just it seems like there's a worthwhile experience in being ready for real games and responding and pulling pitches in the air that need to be pulled and coming through with clutch hits, like going through game situations that count. I don't see a drawback as long as they're not playing through something they shouldn't be playing through. But right now they seem to be fully functional. It's just more a matter of like game speed. And, as we know with Robert, and we've talked about with him, just a matter of like taming that aggression and kind of the way he goes in and out of that swing mode and then eventually ratchets down. You hope that he does that before coming back. If not, you hope that the White Sox have a similar plan like they had with Oscar Colas, because Colas this spring really looks like he knows what he wants to do with, everything a pitcher is throwing at him. And there's a good story that James Fegan wrote, talked about how they, just spammed him with high velocity off speed pitches, basically, around the zone, but below the knees or like below the thighs, basically telling him to lay off those pitches. And it seems like it's worked wonders. So hopefully the White Sox have some idea if Robert comes back stateside with, a sketchy idea of the strike zone, if the White Sox have an idea of just how exactly to combat that.
Ryan Rowland Smith, who was one of the color commentators for that pool out in Taiwan, I think he put it best that they are seeing sequencing that they would not see during spring training, both Moncada and Robert. And they're being pitched in different manners than spring training would be going on. Because pitchers obviously have a game plan, and there's some game planning for hitters, but the pitchers themselves are working on specific situations and specific pitches in those situations because it's a glorified practice. When you're the road team, essentially, in Taiwan, facing Taiwan or Chinese Taipei, in that atmosphere, you're not going to have that same type of energy until opening day in Houston. So I do think it's pretty beneficial that they are able to move on. And if they're going to be facing Japan in Tokyo, that's going to be another crazy atmosphere that they're going to go through. So it's like Robert and Mancata are going to be ready for whatever crowd awaits the White Sox on opening day at Houston, which I am going to assume because they're be given the World Series reigns and it's opening day weekend, that they're going to be sellout crowds and they're going to be ready to go because they've already played in frenzy, high energy type of atmospheres. And they may not see those type of atmospheres again unless the White Sox reach the postseason this year. So I view it as a really good thing, but you are right. Hopefully nothing injury-wise. We haven't seen anything so far in the first 4 games. And if Robert continues to strike out at this type of rate during the World Baseball Classic, when he does rejoin the White Sox, hopefully there is some type of quick adjustment that the White Sox hitting coaches can make with Robert to slim those numbers down. We recorded this podcast episode before the Sunday night game between Team USA and Mexico. So if you're wondering why we're not talking about Tim Anderson's performance, because we recorded this before he played, but Tim Anderson did make the start for Team USA at shortstop against Team Mexico, and we had a watch party. I'm speaking at past tense as we were recording this. We had a watch party with our friends from the 108 between USA and Mexico, and we will continue to have watch parties on playback Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night. Monday night be USA versus Canada. Lance Lynn will be making that start, so of great interest to White Sox fans to watch that game. Tuesday, Mexico against Great Britain, and Wednesday, as we alluded to earlier, this is going to be 6 o'clock Central Time, the Dominican Republic against Puerto Rico, and I cannot wait for that one. High energy between those two countries. But Jim and I will take a quick break. But coming up next, we begin our position preview, starting with the shortstop position and Tim Anderson. Kick off the new year with new gear built to last. Our friends at Shady Rays have you covered from the sun to the slopes with premium polarized shades, customable snow glasses, and much more. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that offers a world-class product that's just as good as any expensive pair you've worn. Durable frames and extremely clear optics for outdoor adventures. And that's not all. Shady Rays offers the most insane protection in all of eyewear. Every pair of sunglasses is backed by lost and broken replacements. If you lose or break your pair, even on day one, they told us they will send you a brand new pair, no questions asked. Wear your Shady Rays with confidence because they have your back long after you purchase. With Shady Rays, you can look good and feel good. To date, they have donated over 20 million meals to fight hunger with Feeding America. If you don't love them, exchange them for a new pair or return them for free within 30 days. There's no risk when you shop with Shady Rays. Their team always has your back. I actually have 3 pairs from Shady Rays because they just look awesome, and I'm very picky about my sunglasses. Sometimes I like to match my sunglasses with my outfit. I can be that way. And exclusively for our listeners, Shady Rays is giving out their best deal of the new year. Go to shadyrays.com and use promo code SOXMACHINE for 50% off 2 pairs of polarized sunglasses. Again, that's shadyrays.com, promo code SOXMACHINE. Try for yourself. The shades rated 5 stars by over 200,000 people. After last week's infield preview, where we focus on first and third base, in this position preview, getting ready for the 2023 season, we will be taking a look at the middle infielders. We're going to start with the starters, or the presumed starters, but we're very confident that these two are going to be the starting middle infield for the Chicago White Sox. At shortstop, Tim Anderson, and Elvis Andrus being the starting second baseman. And we're going to start the conversation with Tim Anderson. And for his projections now, and this is coming from Fangraphs, the depth charts projections for Tim Anderson: 16 home runs, 58 RBIs, 289 batting average, 322 on base percentage, slug 427, a 3.2 WAR season for Anderson through that projection system. And Zips is projecting in 109 games, 13 homers, 45 RBIs for Tim Anderson, a 293 batting average, a 324 on base percentage, slugging 432, and a 2.6 WAR season. This, of course, is coming after a uneven, let's call it, 2022 season for Tim Anderson, because from opening day to Memorial Day weekend, Tim Anderson was a top 15 player in Major League Baseball, Jim, according to wins above replacement. He was already at 2.1 WAR. Then he got the groin injury, and he was replacement level for the rest of the season when he played. And when he was fighting through that injury, then he had a broken bone in his hand, and then he missed the rest of the season. So that's why I say it was a pretty uneven story for Tim Anderson in 2022. He's already made some comments in spring training, everybody pulling on the same string and try to bring more positivity to the White Sox clubhouse. So when it comes to his big story in 2023 before the season starts, what kind of Tim Anderson are we going to see in 2023, Jim?
In a few ways, because there's the performance thing. There's also, he with Jose Abreu out and with, maybe not a leadership void, but just not the guy everybody points to as a leader. And with like somebody like, Eloy Jimenez saying like, I don't know who the leader is. And, Pedro Grifol says that leaders aren't, named, basically leaders become leaders. They don't, they aren't christened it. So like there is a gap there. And I think, Anderson, part of the reason why he hasn't been able to naturally assume that title is the availability, and just, missing, an average of a third of a season makes it hard to be a leader if you're not around, or if you're in a case like last year, just compromised physically, just, basically being your best self only for a couple months of the year and then trying to get by the rest of the year and then not being able to be on the field for the last 2 months, basically. So you look at it that way, and just like, it's amazing that he finished with an average above 300 with everything he had to deal with. But, given the stakes, given just how, much the White Sox offense looks to miss Abreu on paper, and that the ways to combat his absence will be a bunch of improvements all around the diamond. Anderson's probably does as much to help the team as anybody if he's able to harness that improvement, because not only is it like all-star level performance, but it's also games. Like the games have to be there.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a very motivated Tim Anderson. And I've been mentioning this in previous podcast episodes. I've coined the phrase bombs equal bags. I got to get my own saying straight. That I think we're going to see more power from Tim Anderson because of how much the premium shortstops have recently signed for in free agency. And here he is making $12.5 million this year and $14.5 million next year. You can consider him underpaid, but this is a pivotal year for the White Sox. And as an organization trying to get rid of the bad taste in their mouth from 2022, Tim Anderson is right in that same boat. He's trying to get rid of the bad taste that happened in 2022, and him focusing on the positive vibes and using positivity to move forward. We'll see if that positivity will turn into bigger and better results, because I do think he is one of the top 10 shortstops in Major League Baseball if he's healthy, Jim. And that's going to be something that he needs to prove in this season as he turns 30 years old, is that he needs to figure out a way to stay on the field. One thing that caught my attention, so there is a baseball newsletter from Louis Polis called The Lose Letter. Funny. He's a data scientist who loves baseball. And a newsletter post that he recently wrote focused on the shift ban in spring training. And what he found is that currently in spring training, the league, the Grapefruit and Cactus League, the batting average for balls in play is currently .320. Thanks to the shift ban. That is the highest BABIP since 2006. And what Louis is hypothesizing is that based on his research the last 17 spring trainings, there seems to be a direct correlation between spring training BABIP and regular season BABIP. And he's thinking that if we're seeing the all-time high BABIP in spring training, we've got a chance to see one of the highest BABIPs in the league because of the shift ban, with the attention of the ban of trying to bring back the singles for some types of hitters. If this holds true, I have to imagine this is going to be a huge benefit to Tim Anderson, Jim, because he is one of the White Sox players that greatly benefits from having a high BABIP. He is proven to have a high BABIP. And while everybody at times discredits that and say maybe that's more luck than skill, if the shift ban, especially with infielders not playing up the middle or straight up the middle, if that suddenly gets opened up for Tim Anderson again, he could win another batting title.
I think you can look at it two ways. One is that it doesn't help him that much because he's already a great BABIP guy. He already knows how to, put the ball where they ain't. He can hit opposite field. He can, he's not particularly shiftable around the infield, which is why, like, when they try, he's able to foil it by, dinking balls in the right field. So there's that aspect. It could also help him because, like, it shores up his floor. Like, it's a case where, like, if the BABIP ever dried up on him, he would be like an ordinary at best player because his defense isn't that good and his base running is dependent on the health of his legs. So, like, the BABIP is what makes him special. So, like, if that ever dried up on him the way, like, the algorithms have thought it would, because, like, most players, it does vary greatly. And most players do come back to a norm that Anderson doesn't come back to. Like, that helps, like, shore up his floor. So, I mean, like, there's a case where, like, it doesn't help him. And then there's a case where it's a wash. The case where it helps him is, like, if he does want to try tapping into that power, he can do that a little more fearlessly because, like, if he does hit a grounder to the left side, well, they're not going to play him 3 on the left side. Or if the best contact does go up the middle, like, that infielder might not be there. So it's a case where, like, he can be a little bit more adventurous with, like, how much he tries to grip and rip, because that's not as easily defendable. And, like, if he finds out that it's not working for him, perhaps, like, I'm not sure if it's that easy as adjustment for him as it is for other hitters, but, like, perhaps it's a case where, like, he can always go back to his old approach of settling for singles. And then, like, the homers, he lucks into them with, like, the right pitch, meeting the bat at the right time. But those are 3 ways to look at it. And given how new this whole environment is and the whole, this rule has never been implemented at the major league level, like, I'm fascinated to see how it plays out, because I can see the whole spectrum being possible.
With Anderson, the reason I bring this up because in 2019, he had a 399 BABIP. He had almost a 400 batting average when he put the ball in play. In 2020, in the shortened season, 383. 2021, 372. That dropped in 2022 to 347. And he still hit over 300. So he can have closer to, getting closer to league average. Obviously, he's still above average in BABIP compared to 2019 when he was one of the league leaders in batting average and balls in play. But with the shift ban, if it allows Tim Anderson to have a BABIP again at 375 or greater, I mean, we're talking about a hitter in the White Sox that could have a batting average of greater than 315. And as you pointed out, Jim, if it allows Anderson to be more aggressive early in the count, to aim to put the ball over the fence or aiming to, find the gap with line drives and hit for more power, we could see the Tim Anderson that we saw in 2019 and 2020 that slugged way over 800, not slugged over 800, I'm sorry, had an OPS well above 800, had a weighted runs created plus over like 125, so he was 25% better than league average. And he's in the 4s when it comes to wins above replacement. And that easily puts him in the top 10 shortstops in Major League Baseball. So while I understand where the projection models are coming from after a uneven 2022 season with Tim Anderson, out of all the players in the Chicago White Sox, I am most confident in Tim Anderson bouncing back in 2023 and having a really big season. And if the shift ban here is going to benefit all hitters, Tim Anderson has proven in the past, Jim, in recent history, that he could take advantage of those opportunities in many ways. And he could build a monster season that nobody was really expecting.
And just for context, the league average for BABIP in 2022 is 290. So 347 over 290 is quite the advantage. And then, like in previous years, the BABIP had dropped over the years from about 300 to 290s, which doesn't feel like a lot, but when you combine that with the strikeout rates rising basically every year, that's why you've seen such a dramatic decrease in action and kind of station to station, or at least, base to base action, why you've seen such an emphasis on the 3 true outcomes of homers, walks, and strikeouts, because it's really hard to string together those productive at bats the way defenses got better and the pitchers got better. So that's why they've tried to tilt the scales in favor of the offense. And yeah, I mean, certainly all the elements are in play for a lot of bad sequences. Like I could see like the normal pitcher still being excellent, but I could see like just more crooked numbers based on the way, guys who don't miss bats could be punished.
Yeah, this is going to be previewing, like foreshadowing, I should say, an upcoming podcast episode when we talk about pitchers from a pitcher's aspect. Strikeout rate is going to be more important than ever. If you're going to be seeing this type of BABIP numbers with the shift ban, and you're not going to have guys easily in the defensive positions that they were last year, and you're giving up more singles, strikeout rate's going to be more important for pitchers this upcoming season. So let's talk about the one thing that Anderson has to improve upon in 2023. Is there one thing that you found, Jim, that you would like to see improvement from Anderson?
Probably his legs, like the health of his legs, because that really, and I guess you could say his hand too. I mean, you make sure that's all the way back when it comes to his power. But like even before the hand issue came into play, that truncated the rest of the season. Like coming back from the groin injury, he was not himself. He did not have his power. He did not really have his range. And even beforehand, like his range was a little bit sketchy, and like his range was good, but it was also like he could stop a lot of balls, but he couldn't necessarily convert balls on the very edges of his range into outs. Like he was good at getting there, but he had a hard time like completing it. Ball to glove, glove to ball, ball to hand, hand throwing the ball to the first baseman, like all those parts at some stage broke down. So like when you try to like get to a root issue, I think like his legs had the most to do with that. Like he doesn't necessarily make his defense all the way better to where we're talking about like an above average defender, but improves his range enough to where like you can shrug off those, I guess, boxed balls at the very edges of that range we're talking about, and he'll still make most of the plays that he got better at making. And then you just have the more authoritative contact by getting his base into it, which we didn't really see after the groin injury. That's what made him an all-star, and that's what padded his all-star case and allowed him to make the all-star game even after he wasn't the same hitter after coming back from the injured list. But really, like if he doesn't have his legs, if he doesn't have that base, like that's what makes him, from being like an okay shortstop or like slightly above average to an all-star. And I think the White Sox really need that all-star jump this year. His legs will be the key to that.
I think you hit it right in the head. The other thing about the legs too, is he going to steal more? I mean, with the bigger bases, the pickoff attempt limits for pitchers, are we going to see a 20 stolen base season from Tim Anderson? I don't think he's done it once. I apologize. In 2018, Tim Anderson had 26 stolen bases. He was a 2020 hitter that year. He had 20 homers and he had 26 stolen bases. It's the only time Anderson has done that in his career. Could we see that in 2023? Will that aspect of his game return, or is he still going to play it safe when it comes to his legs?
He always gets off to that pace. He always like starts off in April, like, he's on pace for like 35 bags. And then by the All-Star break, it dries up. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really like that as far as the health of his legs. And we're going to know early with Tim Anderson. And probably more important, does he still have that same leg strength come June and July? Because that's when he starts to get hurt during the season, and knock on wood or break any wooden object over your knee. Let's hope that doesn't happen. So let's go to the over-under for Tim Anderson. And we've been poking around this topic, but I have 125 and a half games played by Tim Anderson in the 2023 season, Jim. Are you taking the over or the under?
I'm going to take the over, not with a whole lot of confidence, but I think enough has changed between the new manager, new additions to the training staff. So either there'll be better preparation or better communication should there be an issue. You also have Elvis Andrus there as somebody who can step in to spell him for a week if like he just needs to get off his feet and needs a brief stint on the injured list without like making something worse. And as you've mentioned, like there's the whole motivation thing of shortstops getting paid, and like he can increase the power. Yeah. But like, as we saw with like Dansby Swanson, who's not like a huge power guy himself, like Dansby Swanson got paid because he plays shortstop pretty much every day, and he plays a good kind of shortstop. So you can get paid a few different ways. But if you're only playing, like if you're topping out like at 124 games a year, that's, still going to take a huge chunk out of your payday. And every team that signs you is going to have to account for the half to a third of the season you're going to miss. So ultimately, I think that whatever motivation he has to produce and improve on his numbers also extends to the games played, which probably hampers his earnings most of all.
I'm also taking the over. There's not, if you just look at recent history, we're a bit crazy taking the over, but here we go. Blind optimism for White Sox fans that give us a tough time about being too negative here. We are being pretty optimistic with Tim Anderson, even though everything suggests that 125 games may be tough for him to get to just with his previous injury history, but he's going to do it, damn it. He's going to play more than 125 and a half games.
Yeah, it's also, if he doesn't get there, then the White Sox are kind of screwed.
Yeah.
You're not entirely, the Cleveland, the division isn't deep enough to where like one injury can knock the White Sox out, because every team in the Central, I think, has to deal with that. Like if Jose Ramirez gets hurt, like, if Byron Buxton, has to miss like half the season again, like the Twins are in trouble. So like, it's not a case where one injury can do it, but his absence would be among the most harmful, just because, as we talked with the Andrus signing, like the middle infield depth looks scary without him. And, if he's out again, like Andrus helps, but Andrus only goes so far, and then it's up to the others step up, and we'll get to them in a bit.
Yeah, so let's talk about Elvis Andrus. We are projecting him to be the starting second baseman for the Chicago White Sox on opening day. He's having a really strong spring training. I think he's ready to go for opening day. Depth charts and zips, they are not as optimistic as I am when it comes to Elvis Andrus. Fangraphs depth charts has Andrus at 10 homers, 52 RBIs, a 245 batting average, a below 300 on base percentage. So does Zips, slugging just 362. Zips has Andrus at a 350 slugging percentage. Depth charts on Fangraphs has Andrus at 1.5 WAR in 120 games. Zips has got Andrus at 1.8 WAR in 134 games. And when you look at these numbers and the way that I'm seeing him play at spring training, and remembering and how he just finished with the White Sox last year, I'm not exactly dumbfounded, but I am one to bet against the projections. And I think Andrus is going to crush these projections. Can Elvis Andrus beat these projections, Jim? I think that's the biggest storyline for Andrus. Can he defy the aging process here and deliver one more time for the White Sox?
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about the wins above replacement. He was worth 2 wins alone to the White Sox in 43 games, according to Fangraphs. I think Baseball Reference was a little bit lower, but still, like, clearly, like that's like an all-star pace.
Yeah.
Over the course of all season, not like enough to get any MVP support unless you're like all of a sudden you're in the middle of it. But yeah, it's a case where, talk about motivation for one, and that Andrus seemed pretty steamed with the way the Athletics handled the end of his career, even though it was understandable as a baseball decision and the way the A's were going, and probably Andrus himself didn't really care to be there, for a team that's mailing it in. So ultimately it was an upgrade on his position from like a baseball standpoint. He just gets paid far less this year. And, maybe it's a case where like he'd prefer to have the millions versus playing for a contender, but it just happens to be like he can make do with what the White Sox, the opportunity he has in front of with the White Sox. So I think like the projections, there are some weak points in terms of Andrus' game that could knock him down a little bit. I think the big thing concerns me is his performance against righties was ordinary, even below average. Like all of his above average stuff came against lefties. And as we've talked about the White Sox, especially when they're at the heyday of their lefty killing period, like that was a case where adding another lefty killer doesn't really help that much. And they still have weaknesses against righties. So like, adding another lefty killer might not help that much, but he does have a higher floor still against righties than the other candidates. So it's a case where, to me, it's not so much a matter of can he beat his projections. It's more of a matter of like, will the way he beats his projections be felt? Like if he adds to the ways the White Sox are already good, but doesn't help them in the way that they're bad, then it's a case where like, yeah, he might be worth 3 to 4 wins, but his impact won't be as felt as if like he could have done the same production against righties with his weakness against lefties where he might have had more help.
Yeah, this is just the third season last year for Elvis Andrus, and in large part the way that he played for the White Sox, where for the season he was above 100 in weighted runs created plus. He was above 100 back in 2016 and 2017 for the Texas Rangers. 2017 was his big season where he hit 20 homers and he scored 100 runs and he drove in 88 RBIs for that Rangers team. And he was worth 4.4 WAR according to Fangraphs. That was his best year as a regular in the major leagues. And moving the conversation over to what is one thing that Elvis Andrus has to improve upon, I'm going to be focusing on how he's handling second base because it is a different angle than he is used to for his entire career at being a shortstop. Now, he has admitted second base is a little weird for him because it's a different angle, but we talked so much already in this podcast episode about the offensive impact with the shift being banned. Now here we are talking about the defensive impact being the shift being banned. And when we talked about Elvis Andrus re-signing with the White Sox, we were pretty hopeful. All right, you have two major league shortstops now up the middle. And I'm wondering if Andrus can carry over his shortstop defensive ability over to second base. And it doesn't get too weird, Jim. And he's able to continue to turn double plays with Tim Anderson. That's got to raise his floor, right? As far as production with wins above replacement, if he can show better defensive ability for the White Sox at second.
I think so. It's a case where like there's always the weird outlier. Like I always remember Alexi Ramirez being ordinary to below average at second base, and Ozzie Guillen say like, oh, he's gonna be way better at shortstop. And you're thinking like, that's up the defensive spectrum. How is he going to be better at shortstop? And sure enough, like he was a very good shortstop. And, you know, of course, Ozzie should know, like, yeah, it's a case where like, yeah, maybe you do a appeal to authority a little bit in that case, because, you know, maybe one good shortstop to another can understand like, yeah, he's got what it takes, and second base is weird. So I don't necessarily, you know, I guess blindly assume that Andrus will be as good at second as well at shortstop, but all of the math is there in terms of like the length of throws, the, you know, the angles you can take. And also like, it's going to be different for all second basemen, no matter what, this year. I think that's something in his favor. Like he's not moving to a second base position that a whole bunch of other guys have already mastered by having no help on that side of the diamond. Like every second baseman over the last, you know, 5, 6, 7 years, whenever like shifting became like, super widespread to where like only a few teams were kind of holding out. Like they've had help. They've had help on the right side. They've had help behind them. Like it's been very easy for ordinary second basemen to be masked, and now they can't. So perhaps this is the best year for anybody to be making the shift, just because like if he looks out of sorts or out of place, or like he was standing in the wrong place and finds himself just being out of range and BABIP goes against him, like I imagine there will be a handful of second basemen who are in the same position aside from like the best of the best.
I think he's going to handle it well. Like when it comes to the middle infield, as long as Tim Anderson and Elvis Andrus stay healthy, again, the precursor to everything regarding the 2023 Chicago White Sox, just stay healthy. I have a feeling this has got a chance to be a pretty strong up the middle type of unit. And we've been hoping for something like this. Even when the White Sox drafted Nick Madrigal, we had visions of Tim Anderson and Nick Madrigal up the middle when, again, we still had high hopes for Nick Madrigal. It's been a while where the White Sox had solid footing up the middle, Jim, at shortstop and second base. Maybe you were confident in one of the two, but you weren't super confident in both. For me, at least, and maybe, again, this is just my blind optimism with this particular position group, it's been, what, a decade since I have felt this comfortable with the White Sox up the middle at short and second.
It's good. Like it's definitely solid. I mean, there's always like the Cesar Hernandez worry about just like a veteran showing up and
sure,
you know, having like, oh, he should provide a high floor, and then it just completely collapses. But at least we had the introductory period last year, which I think helps in this case. And like, even if he comes down, or he has room to come down and still be a very useful person, because like, you know, as we've talked about with like when he was signed, it's just, he prevents disaster from spreading to shortstop if he stays healthy. And like, he's had a pretty good health track record. So like that should be as safe to assume as pretty much anybody, you know, just setting aside age concerns and the occasional, injury here and there throughout a long career that's been otherwise very durable. I feel pretty good about that. So like, it's really a case where he can patch a hole at shortstop should Tim Anderson have to miss some time, and, allow the second base auditions we thought we might be seeing with Romy Gonzalez and Lenyn Sosa and Larry Garcia to take place at like much lower stakes, whether it's on the bench or whether it's in Charlotte, which I think is nice.
Yes. So the last thing about Elvis Andrus, over under, this is a weird one, and I'm going to explain. 107.5 weighted runs created plus. Now you may be asking, Josh, how did you get to that number? Because I have a steak dinner bet now with our friend Beeflo from the 108. If you remember the steak dinner bets from last year, we are bringing that back, and this is our season-long steak dinner bet. I have the over. I think Elvis Andrus will have a weighted runs created plus of 108 or more in 2023. And our friend Beefloaf is taking the under because he doesn't share my optimism with Elvis Andrus. So, Jim, I ask you, are you taking the over or are you taking the under?
I regret to inform you I'm taking the under.
Not buying you a steak if it happens.
Yeah, not necessarily because of anything pertaining to him. Like, I do have my questions about how he'll handle right-handed pitching. I do see that his batting average on balls in play against right-handed pitching is like 30 points lower than it was against lefties. So that's a case where maybe the shifting does help him a little bit in terms of getting more cheap singles against right-handed pitching. That's good. But I just wonder when it comes to rate stats, and I would hesitate to place bets on rate stats just because, like, I don't know what the average WRC plus or OPS plus is going to be this year or I know what the average is going to be, 100, but I don't know what the average like weighted runs created is going to be, like, or OPS is going to be, or BABIP's going to be, just because like these new rules in place. So I could see, like, if the spring training numbers do carry over, like you mentioned earlier, that could really throw everything out of whack to, like, even what feels like a very good season by Andrus looks pretty much like league average because everybody else is benefiting in the same way. So that's why I'm a little hesitant to say he'll beat that, just because, like, I think there's a lot of room for him to be very useful to the White Sox and even very good as a hitter and still not look that impressive according to the league.
Yeah, league average, I think, was an OPS below 700 last year. So like a 100 weighted runs created plus could have been an OPS below 700. And when we look at those slash line folks, that's not good. Mm-hmm. A below 700 OPS is not good, but that was league average, the dead ball. Now we've made these rule changes. So that's a really good point, Jim. Watch, the league average OPS is like 725 and Elvis Andrus is like 735 and he doesn't get to 108. He's at like 104 weighted runs created plus. And we're happy with that type of production from Elvis Andrus. You're not happy. But I lose out on a steak dinner. Yeah. So I believe in you, Elvis. I believe in you, Tim Anderson. Again, this up the middle, before the White Sox signed Elvis Andrus, I was really concerned talking about second base because I just did not like what the White Sox were doing at second base. And now that they brought back Elvis Andrus, I feel a heck of a lot better about the White Sox middle infield. So I'm pretty optimistic about this unit. Now, what happens in case somebody gets hurt? We're going to talk about the White Sox backup options after a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back to the Sox Machine Podcast. All right, so let's talk about the White Sox middle infield depth. We have talked quite a bit about Luis Garcia and Romy Gonzalez, and Lenyn Sosa, maybe even seeing Jose Rodriguez this year for the Chicago White Sox. Well, it just so happens to be on Sunday after the 1-1 tie against Los Angeles Angels, the Chicago White Sox made some roster moves. They optioned Carlos Perez and Lenyn Sosa to Charlotte. So Lenyn Sosa will not be on the opening day roster right now for the Chicago White Sox. They've optioned Brian Ramos and Jose Rodriguez to Birmingham. So I don't think that's any type of surprise there. Yoki Cespedes, Edgar Navarro, Nate Fisher, Andrew Perez, and Sammy Peralta, they have been reassigned to minor league camp. But when it comes to the middle infield depth, again, there was the question of Lenyn Sosa versus Romy Gonzalez once spring training started, and that was again before the Elvis Andrus signing. Well, Romy outlasted Lenyn Sosa, but I think when it comes to middle infield depth, if this is still a question between Luis Garcia and Romy Gonzalez, Jim, you have alluded to the fact that it doesn't make a lot of sense to carry both of them on the bench. Do you still feel that way?
Yeah, especially when both are playing the way that they are right now. Like I'm looking at their spring training stats. Romy's 1 for 17.
Oh my gosh.
It's a 0.59 average, 6 strikeouts, which isn't terrible, but still just like not producing much. Garcia is 4 for 23 with 5 strikeouts. Like he's got a homer, he's got a double. He's shown a little bit more pop, a little bit more life, but he's also like he had a base running blunder, didn't realize how many outs there were.
Yeah, Steve Stone made fun of him.
Yeah, just so like, neither player is covering himself in glory right now. So yeah, if it comes down to that, I just carry Larry just because like Gonzalez isn't quite ready yet. Like he didn't have a great year at AAA last year because of the issues he had with the tonsillitis and the leg issues he had. Like we knew that Sosa probably just needed a good, proper period in AAA to finish his development and build on the progress he made last year. So that's not a surprise. I was curious to see like just, what all this Romy hype was leading to. And so far it hasn't amounted to much. Like he made a nice play in left field. So I think we've seen some of the versatility come into play, but the big question in terms of like, will he hit enough to make it matter has not been resolved yet. He still has some time, but like I said, I'd rather see Garcia used as like fodder to, if he's not going to be productive, but if Gonzalez is also not going to be productive, and if Sosa's not ready to be productive, just take the guy who's being paid already and can at least protect those players from being overexposed or pre-exposed if they're not ready for that kind of stage yet. And then like once April passes, and if Garcia still looks like a crisis, then see how guys look at Charlotte and go from there.
So when it comes to the Romy Gonzalez hype coming to spring training, which was borderline ridiculous and continues to age worse as we march down spring training, does that enter or create any doubt in your mind with the new coaching staff and their ability to read the players that they currently have on hand? Because they were the ones building up hype for Romy Gonzalez. And when you're 1 for 17 in spring training and seeing some of his plate appearances, whether it's in highlights or the few spring training streams that we have, I don't know what they saw in the offseason, but it's not translating on the field. And what we are seeing in the field in spring training looks a lot like what we saw from Romy Gonzalez at the end of the 2022 season, which is not a major leaguer.
On the plus side, there's Oscar Colas, who's slugging .633, and he was there in Miami with Jose Castro and Pedro Grifol just as much. So,
yes,
it could be, to me, it was a case of like, they were just trying to pretend they weren't interested in Andrus or something like that. And just, as negotiations are going on.
Okay.
And then after it happened, they couldn't say like, yeah, we were lying about that. So they still had to pump him up a little bit. And also maybe they want to like, let Larry know that like, if he looked as bad in spring training and somebody looked great, like, his job might not be safe. And unfortunately that's not happening right now. Sosa numbers, 2 for 15, no walks, no strikeouts. So like the strikeout problem wasn't there, but it's probably the same swing decisions need to be sharpened up the way that we thought they might need to be. So that's fine there. But yeah, it's a little bit of a mess. And I was hoping that like Romy would step up and prove everybody right so far, but like there's still time. Like they were unrealistic expectations. I mean, like he could have looked great, and part of him looking great could have been like he's fully healthy and up to speed, and he has all of his physical capabilities back, which is no small thing. Now you just have to like apply it to real game situations against guys trying to get you out, and the knowledge base of just failing like that. And I think that process got interrupted last year by the health issues he had, and hopefully he'll be able to do it without should he be able to do it, he'll have a spot in the roster. Should it take some time, or should it be elusive? Like hopefully the White Sox won't be forced to have to call him up again because nobody else is really taking that mantle.
Could you imagine if Elvis Andrus did not return to the White Sox?
Yeah.
Our second base conversation would be, who do you choose? Leury Garcia, Romy Gonzalez, who's 1 for 17 in spring training, or Lenyn Sosa, who's 2 for 15. Like, unlike as you brought up Oscar Colas has performed so well in spring training, and he's hit home runs now in back-to-back games in spring training. He's getting a little bit more confident with the power stroke, and he's starting to flex some power. Oscar Colas has earned the starting role in right field. Nobody at this moment has earned any starting position with the White Sox between Garcia, Gonzalez, and Sosa. And quite frankly, I mean, Sosa ends up losing, but picking between Garcia and Gonzalez, like it's a poor reason to say it's going to be Lurie because he's getting $5 million. But you're right, Jim. Like I can't argue against that point because you're not going to cut Garcia now, especially when you still owe him guaranteed money next year. That the contract may play a factor, and he's well liked in the clubhouse, and it's another veteran voice in the clubhouse for rookie manager Pedro Grifol. Like that might be the deciding factor of why Lurie Garcia wins the job over Romy Gonzalez. But I'm with you. I don't think you can have both on the bench. No matter how much Pedro Grifol likes Romy Gonzalez, if he does not pick up his numbers in spring training, he's got to go back into Charlotte. And it'd be interested to see on how Charlotte uses him, because not only will Charlotte have Lenyn Sosa and Romy Gonzalez, but they still have Yolbert Sanchez, and I'm sure they're going to have Jake Berger and or Zach Remillard. Like the infield is kind of loaded for Charlotte in a way that they have more infielders than they actually have spots in the infield. Do they use Romy Gonzalez at a super utility role with the Knights and he just plays all over the field to keep him loose in that particular situation if the White Sox do need a super utility type in case Lurie Garcia gets hurt? But I think if you're trying to find hope in the depth, what should we tell White Sox fans? Pay attention to Lenyn Sosa and Jose Rodriguez. Like that's your best hope right now?
Yeah, I like those guys the most just because they're on a natural progression with the way their skills are coming together and with the way they've overcome stumbles, being young for levels at the levels they played, like especially both. Sosa's had like a persistent learning curve at every level he's played. Rodriguez has knocked everything out until Birmingham, in which he had like 2 months of hardships until he finally figured it out and started pulling the ball in the air with authority. And that's fine because he's been really young for every level he's played. So like, they've been perfectly acceptable with the way they've, whenever they've had weak moments, it's been because they're young and they're learning. And with Gonzalez, he's on a bit of the older side. Like, I don't want to say he's old just because he did lose a pandemic season. So in terms of development, he's probably right on track in terms of like the amount of major league professional experience he's gained for his the years he's been in pro ball is fine. And the levels he's played at is fine. It's just a case where like we've seen some very real flaws talking about like the swinging and missing in the zone on fastballs to where like, yeah, there's something that's really prohibiting him from sticking the majors that isn't quite evident yet with Sosa and Rodriguez. So I would go with them naturally, but I'm not opposed to Gonzalez, who already made one big leap, doing it again, just because like, I think there's something to the idea of players who have shown the ability to learn and adjust once. Like, why wouldn't they be able to tighten up another part of their game? Like, and they're not going to ever, it's not going to be a case where they get to perfect, but at least, they've shown the ability to learn and to take coaching and to understand what they're doing wrong and to make it right. So I'm not counting him out. It's just, I think there are more reasons to be skeptical about him just because of what we've seen at the major league level.
Yeah, this last point I'll make when it comes to the middle infield depth for the White Sox, and I just thought of this, and this is more of a topic of the Future Sox podcast, which you guys should also listen to, subscribe to, with Mike Rakin and James Fox. The Birmingham infield could be interesting. If you're going to have Jose Rodriguez and Brian Ramos, and if they challenge Colson Montgomery and they start Montgomery in Birmingham, that could be a reason to tune in to the web streams in Birmingham. Those three. It could make Birmingham Barons games a lot more enjoyable to watch.
Kurt Bloom is always a reason to tune into.
Well, Kurt's always great. I mean, yeah, that's without saying, but I'm just talking about like on the field. Yes. I mean, Kurt's entertaining no matter what's on the field for Birmingham. It's been a challenge for the Barons to put together a complete team, a winning team in the Southern League in Birmingham. But when you got Brian Ramos, Colson Montgomery, and Jose Rodriguez in the infield, you got a chance to be really good every single day for the Birmingham Barons, and the folks deserve that.
April could be rough, but hopefully like by midsummer, they're winning some ball games with some action, which those, three players they're exciting players. Like they all can, keep the line moving. They all can take extra bases. Rodriguez his stolen base rate has really taken off. So, I mean, like, they're the kind of players you want to see at the minor league level, just in terms of like things happening, runs crossing the plate. So hopefully it's a quicker learning curve for them. And hopefully Project Birmingham knocked that down a little bit to make it more accessible. But yeah, I'm hoping the same thing because it's been a little bit bare for them. And, Lord knows when there's like a great moment in a Barons game, like, yeah, those highlights are always worth listening to because Kurt always brings it.
Yeah, and the community, they do support the Barons. Yeah, it may not be on the same level as Charlotte has a bigger stadium, but you get 4,000 people at Regions Field in Birmingham, and I've been to one of those games. You could definitely feel the energy, especially when Michael Kopech was pitching in Birmingham, and just how everybody was really attentive in that community. They could have a good reason to be attending games in Birmingham this year, especially if you have those three infielders. And yeah, we'll talk about Colson Montgomery as he progresses, but it's a little early for him to talk about him being a realistic option for the White Sox in the middle infield in 2023. That might be a conversation more for next year, White Sox fans, in 2024, if Colson Montgomery performs well in Double-A. And we know about the Birmingham brick wall. So best of luck to Colson Montgomery. And yeah, that was just something that I thought of as far as the near future for the White Sox in the middle infield with their top prospects. But that will do it for this position preview for the 2023 season for the Chicago White Sox. Up the middle at shortstop, at second base. So we have taken care of most of the positions. We got to talk about catcher in a future episode. We got to talk about the White Sox bullpen. We got to talk about the White Sox starting pitching. So that's some position groups that you could look forward to an upcoming Monday podcast for the Sox Machine. And if you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to our show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You can follow us on Twitter. We're at Sox Machine. You can follow me on Twitter at SoxMachine_Josh. We also post our podcasts up in the YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. Please subscribe to our channel and also watch some of the videos that we make on youtube.com/Sox Machine. If you enjoy our work and would like more, you can help support us over at patreon.com/Sox Machine, where our Patreon supporters get exclusive content. They get ad-free versions of both the podcast and website. And when we have new Sox Machine swag in the Sox Machine store, they're the first ones to receive it. We just recently met with our Veterans Committee members to talk about plans that we have for this upcoming season, Jim. We're also going to be curling with them in the upcoming weeks as well. So if you are interested in being part of our Veterans Committee, you can go to patreon.com/Sox Machine. You can read over the details. You can apply to be part of our Veterans Committee. And Jim and I will talk to you about being part of that type of exclusive club where you get more into the behind the scenes at Sox Machine as far as our thinking and some of our big goals that we have in the next couple of years to try to bring the best White Sox content to you guys. Again, you can sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine, where monthly plans start at $2 a month, or you can save with an annual subscription. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com, your home for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.